Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Preparing for Teacher Training, What I Wish I'd Known by EdConnect. I'm Ben, I'm one of the members of the steering group, and I'm going to be your host this morning. We've got a really fab event lined up for you, some really great speakers, and we're so pleased that you're going to join us. So, to begin with, I'm just going to introduce what EdConnect is, as I know some of you may not be aware of what EdConnect is. As you may have seen us pop up on social media. But EdConnect is a global grassroots network for early career teachers and professionals in education. That includes trainees and aspiring teachers. We're completely run by volunteers, by early career teachers, for early career teachers, and we believe that every early career teacher should be able to thrive and not just survive. And we reflect this in our values and the activity that we run through our network, including today's event, because we want all trainee teachers to be able to start their teacher training and teaching career in a positive way. So where have we come from? We actually started in April last year as just one Instagram chat group for primary trainee teachers in their third year of a degree, on a 3-year degree, and we have grew to a series of Instagram chat groups to then remodeling to become a network. We ran our first virtual event in January, our second one in February, which sold out 4 times. We had to keep adding more tickets to. We've got today's event, and this morning we hit over 1,000 members as well, which is really exciting. In September, that will see the launch of our regional and local hubs as well, where early career teachers can network with other early career teachers and trainees at a local level, which is if you sign up as a member, which is the huge benefit you get. And we're holding a launch event in October 2021, which I'll explain more at the end. So our network, we're currently based, we have members based in over 18 countries across the world, mainly in England is the main part, and Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, Ireland, and the Middle East as well as other areas. We've got a big following on social media, so please do make sure you follow our Instagram and Twitter. We'll be sharing that on the through the comments today and on the screen. And we have held 2 virtual events, and this is our 3rd one. And we've held 5 Instagram lives, and like I said, I sort of gave away this number, but we've now have over 1,000 members signed up across those 18 countries, which when we set up an Instagram chat group all that time ago, never thought it would come to this. So thank you everyone for their support in their network, and thank you to you for attending today. And just to give you an idea of where those people are, we haven't added the 18th country just yet. We've got the we've only got the 17 on there, but these are where all our members are based, and we'll be remodeling our offer next year to make sure we can meet the needs of early career professionals in education globally. We are very values led, and we're led by 7 values, and today's event is based around the value of empathy. So we support each other through our training and teaching careers, and our members office is based around supporting them to be the best they can be. We want you to all, like we said, thrive and not just survive in teaching. And that's why we've created this event. The theme of this event is what I wish I'd known. So we have an amazing panel of speakers. I'm going to show you all the speakers on the screen in a moment. So we have just under 11 speakers because not everyone could make today. There'll be a series of Q&A panels and a keynote. And the special thing is that apart from our keynote, all of our other speakers today are all currently on teacher training, whether that be they're training through Teach First, whether that be they're doing a PGCE, whether that be they're doing a 3-year BA or BEd. They're all at some stage of their teacher training, and they want to give back and share with you what they wish they had known at the start of their teaching journey, their teacher training journey. So our speakers today, unfortunately not everyone could make it. So Amy, Matt, Sam, Rianne and Davina couldn't make today. So what they are going to do for us is the majority of them are going to share something with us afterwards, whether that be in the form of, say, a PowerPoint or a pre-recorded video. They're going to share that with us. So we will share that with all attendees after the event. And you can see our steering group on screen. Zoe was supposed to be with us today. Unfortunately, she's had an emergency, so she was going to host with me today. So unfortunately, you're going to have to put up with me dipping in and out of today. We've got our keynote, Sarah Mullin there, who you can see, who was the author of What They Didn't Teach Me on my PGCE. So she'll be talking to us later on, and Hannah as well, who saved the day by coming in at the very last minute as one of our as cover for one of our speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to add Julia in, who is our first speaker. Julia is a third-year trainee teacher, just finished her third year and has recently got her first teaching post. And she's going to be talking to us all about high expectations. So Julia, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Hi everyone. So like Ben said, I'm Julia and I've just finished my 3-year primary education with QTS degree, and I'm due to start my first job in September. And I also have a small Instagram and YouTube channel dedicated to teaching tips and things like that. So feel free to contact me on there and everything. So today I'm going to talk about TS1, and I've just seen that in the chat, some of you are just about to start your teaching careers and some of you have already started. So if you're not familiar with the teacher standards, it's a set of 8 standards that all teachers sort of have to aim to meet within their practice. So I'm talking about TS1 today, which is that all teachers should set expectations which inspire, motivate, and challenge students. And the 3 bullet points underneath, I won't read through them all, but it's about having a safe and stimulating environment, stretching them to the best of their ability, and demonstrating positive attitudes, values, and behaviour. So yeah, I think to understand the importance of setting high expectations, it's important to understand the Pygmalion effect, which is this phenomenon whereby higher expectations lead to higher performance. If you have positive expectations of your students, that influences their performance positively. However, if you have negative experience, that should be expectations, that influences their performance negatively. This is because students internalize the expectations and labels placed upon them by their teacher, and they in turn self-fulfill those expectations, whether they're positive or negative, which is why TS1 is extremely important. It's extremely to have those well-calculated expectations and setting high expectations of students so that those are internalized, and hence it leads to better outcomes. So the diagram there just explains that our beliefs about others influence our actions towards others, which in turn affects their beliefs about themselves and then their actions towards us as well. So yeah, next slide, please. So today I'm going to talk about what I've learned in my own experiences of how I've effectively set high expectations in the primary classroom. Next slide. So my first tip would be to set high expectations from the very beginning of the school year, not only in terms of work and presentation, but in terms of establishing rules and routines and having high expectations for those from the start of the year, so the children know sort of the standard they need to work towards as well. And also to know them yourself so that you can maintain them consistently in all areas, and it sort of goes both ways. So if the children know what to, the children should know what to expect from you, and then you should know what to expect from the children as well. I think it's also important when setting high expectations to give children a purpose, or I call it giving them a why. There's no point really saying, I expect, I expect you to do this. You need to sort of tell them why you're setting that high expectation, to give them a reason and a sense of purpose to work towards that goal. And it's just the same in terms of behaviour management. There's not much point telling a child to be good, especially when some children don't know what being good means or what being good entails. For example, in terms of setting high expectations for behaviour, you might say, oh, we should walk silently in the corridor. But some children who, especially who haven't really had good behaviour modeled to them, need a why. So we walk silently in the corridor so we don't disturb the other children in their classrooms and things like that. And it's the same, in terms of any expectation you set. Yeah, and my other tip would be to make success criteria accessible. So success criteria is when you outline at the start of the lesson, by the end of the lesson, for example, if they're producing a short story, it could be, I have included a range of adjectives, I have included a simile, and I have a clear beginning, middle, and end to my story. But in order to encourage high expectations and fulfill TS1, it's something I've been given feedback in on my own practice. It's important to just make that success criteria clear, and also make a fun way to interact with it as well. And something fun I've done as well is having the children to think of their own success criteria. Instead of writing it on the board, you could ask them, what do you think a successful piece or a successful short story would look like? And then you can write their ideas on the board, and they can work towards those ideas, which is good because it motivates them as well, because they've created those success criteria themselves as well. Yeah, next slide, please. And then also for TS1, it's also important to remember that every pupil is different, and you might have different expectations for different pupils as well. And these high expectations might mean different things to different people. So therefore, it's just important to always just keep differentiating effectively to make sure everyone's challenged, which will allow every single pupil to meet their expectations and beyond as well. Yeah, and then, like I said before, it's good for children to set their own goals. I like carrying out WAGLs, which stands for what a good one looks like. So that's where together the children can decide what a final product may look like. So if you're designing something in design and technology, it would be a good idea. What do you think the end product should look like, and getting the children to think of it themselves instead of you telling them. That way it's more motivating for them and more encouraged, a good way for them to become self-motivated and to have high expectation, learn to build high expectations of themselves as well, where it's not coming from a teacher or something external. Yeah. And you can also work together as a class to set expectations. So having the teacher and pupil work together to set expectations for class rules, behaviours, pieces of work. The teacher can model those. And yeah, so for example, if it was in terms of story writing, you could build up a story together, highlight the key features and set the expectation there so the children know what to work towards as well. Yeah. And then finally, I'd say that for TS1, consistency is key. You need to consistently set those high expectations in both terms of work and behaviour management. It's even for little things like remembering every day to underline the date and title and where to place it and how to structure it. There's just maintaining that consistency throughout those routines, and just make sure standards stay high, and just through keeping expectations high as well. Yeah, so here's just a summary of all the points I went through. So it was TS1, setting high expectations to stretch and challenge pupils. The points I made were to set high expectations from the beginning of the year, give children a why, setting clear success criteria, having effective differentiation, having children set their own expectations or working with children to do that, and maintaining consistency throughout as well. Yeah, and yeah, I'd just like to finish on the last slide with this quote that was something that was told to me in primary school, which stuck with me. And I remember they said, "Don't tell me the sky is the limit when there are footprints on the moon," which makes me think of those expectations. And again, the Pygmalion effect of, if we have high expectations, that does lead to higher outcomes. And I think that just really reinforces the importance of that. So thank you for listening. I'm not sure if there's any questions in the chat. Yeah.
Let me unmute myself. Sorry, that was a rookie error there to not unmute myself before speaking.
No worries.
Thank you, Julia, for starting off our event like that. That was fantastic. And I think that quote that you've just finished with there really does sum up high expectations perfectly, and how it is sort of underpinned in everything that teachers do, whether that be behaviour, whether that be work, whether that just be day-to-day practice. So thank you. We look forward to welcoming you back for the Q&A. I did put a message in the chat that if you do have any questions for any of our speakers today, please do add them through the chat so we can collate them for our Q&A panels. We're going to be having 2 Q&A panels. So our first 3 speakers will have a Q&A panel. We're going to have 3 Q&A panels actually. Our second 3 speakers will have a Q&A panel, and then our keynote will have a Q&A panel as well. So thank you, Julia, and we'll see you in a moment.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, now Paul, who is our second presenter, is just having some technical issues. So Danny, I can see you're in the studio. Could you give me a thumbs up if you're okay to go next, and then we'll add Paul in afterwards? Perfect, thank you. So Danny is a secondary trainee English teacher coming to the end of her training year, and she's going to be talking about the important topic of inclusion and adaptive teaching. So Danny, thank you so much for giving up a bit of your Saturday to come and talk to us, and really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. So I'll hand you the mic over to you.
Thanks, Ben. So as Ben said, I'm a secondary English teacher. I've been on the schools direct route with the University of Derby, and I've actually spent the whole of this year in a special school. I actually finished there yesterday because I've got to go and do 4 weeks in a mainstream school. So I've had pretty good experience in terms of being inclusive within the classroom and kind of out of the classroom. And I've actually got a job in September at a special school where I'll be still teaching English with my Key Stage 4 group. But yeah, so inclusivity will still be a big thing for me. So I'm going to be talking about Standard 5, thanks Ben, which is all about adapting your teaching. So as it says here, the students need to learn at different rates and they need different types of support. You as the teacher need to understand these differences. You need to be responsive about these differences to try and adapt your teaching in a way that they can understand what you're trying to say to them and what you're asking them to do. Flexibility is a really big one. You also need to understand different learning styles and have an understanding of SEND, so special educational needs and disabilities, and understand how you can support them or how you can implement support within the classroom so the child gets the best out of what they're learning. Could we go on to the next one after that? Sorry. Thank you. So what does it mean to be inclusive? So that's actually a definition that I got off the internet here. So it's about being equal for everybody. So no matter what their physical or their mental challenges are, you've got to be inclusive and you've got to be equal. Don't kind of set different things just because you think, oh, they might not be able to. Try and be as inclusive as you can. So how can we do this in the classroom? Can we move on to the next slide? So when you say differentiation or adaptive teaching, a lot of people automatically think different worksheets, or I'll go by ability groups. Nando's menu is sort of something that's very secondary based. I've seen it in English. So you've got obviously your hot, your medium, and your lemon and herb, and you can give different tasks, and the pupils can actually pick them, and they can be good for home worksheets and stuff. But is it necessarily being inclusive? It can be, but not always. Help sheets, so like word mats and all that sort of thing, they're all really useful. They're all really useful tools to do. And in terms of ability groups and things, it's really easy to teach to kind of similar abilities. But there are other ways that we can be inclusive. Can we move on to the next one, please, Ben? So one thing that I have learned this year is scaffolding. Scaffolding is kind of the one thing that I practice in the classroom all the time. And this can be done through questioning. And it can also be done through providing students different kind of sheets to help them, but questioning and scaffolding through questioning is the biggest thing, and it's easy to do. You don't have to kind of create a million worksheets, and you don't have to think, oh well, this student needs this. Being in a special school, no matter what classroom you're in, every student has a different type of need. Every EHCP has different things on them, and you've got to try and hit those targets, and that's virtually impossible. And you can end up planning 5 different lessons for one lesson, and that just takes up so much time, and time's precious when you're a teacher, especially as a trainee, because you have to create all your resources and all that sort of thing. So the biggest thing that I've learned is questioning, and it's really been useful for me, especially for, I've taught GCSE. Those students need to all get to the same point, so why would you differentiate the sheets for them when they all need to answer the same exam question? So you scaffold it through your questioning to them, so you give them extra hints in what you're saying rather than giving them a whole different sheet, because that's not good for them. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So this is all through doing different things. So how you speak to them. Modelling is absolutely key. I'll give you a top tip. I'm not very confident in modelling, live modelling in the classroom. I write it the night before and I have it in front of me, and then I'll write it out to them. You're a new teacher, you're not expected to know everything, that you can do everything. So cheat your answer, have it there in front of you. And if you make mistakes, it's okay, because the kids can see that it's okay to make mistakes. Be flexible, as I've said. So your plans aren't set in concrete. So make sure that you are flexible. If there's a misconception and you need to go through it, spend the rest of the lesson going through it, make sure that they understand. Pre-teaching vocabulary and being extremely explicit is key to having an inclusive classroom. Don't try and flower things out, especially with kids with autism. Be dead explicit. And as I've said, model. Don't always kind of pin things on the final summative assessment, especially when it comes to SEND. Formative assessment throughout kind of the lesson or your scheme of work is really useful, because it kind of gives you the information to inform your planning for the next lesson and where the kids are. So I know kind of the education system is pinned to that final exam in GCSE, but in order for you to get to that point, don't just say, oh, well, I'll see where they're at in this assessment. Do little assessments, even if it's just a quick retrieval quiz at the beginning of your lesson, so you understand where your kids are at before you move on, because you might have somebody in the corner who's got no idea, so you need to keep going through it so you are being inclusive. Can we move on to the next one? So this is ways how to do this. So still give them the extended tasks, just chunk them out. So I'll give you an example of what I did. We read an adapted version of Jane Eyre because the language was too much for the kids at my school to take. So we read an abridged version. And in order to kind of keep them engaged in the lesson, and I wanted them all to read, I chunked out the text and I wrote it out as a script. So each child had a different line to read, depending on who they were playing, but they all were understanding of what was going on in the story because they could all follow it, and it was a lot easier. Structure strips have been my absolute best friend this year, especially for English, because it's just that little thing in their margin to say, oh, I should use this sentence starter, I should do this. Dual coded resources can be really useful. The I do, we do, you do, that's a really big one, because again, it's the modeling. You're showing them how to do it. Then they're doing it as a group. They can call upon their peers if they need to, and then they go away and do it. This is mainly secondary based, so I don't know if I've not seen if many primary schools have visualizers. I don't have one, but I've seen them in action and I've heard they're amazing. And then again, this is mainly English. Don't kind of just say to them, this is what we're doing. and don't just kind of put a limit on where they are, especially if you've got really clever students. Let them go away and do some research. Let them read journals about what's going on and how the context of things. Can we move on to the next one? Sorry. Oh, was that the last one? Sorry, I thought I put something else on. Don't worry. So what I wanted to say was, don't put a limit on where your students are at. Let them smash the glass ceiling. Your students should always be working harder than you in the classroom. So allow them to find out things, allow them to make mistakes. But yeah, it's all through your questioning. That's the one big thing I've learned this year. And as I say, I've been in a special school, so I've experienced lots of different needs. But yeah, if there's any questions at the end, I will happily answer them. And thank you.
Thank you, Danny, for that. And I think inclusion and adaptive teaching is such a big area, and inclusion itself, there's so much more to it as well, that it's very hard to sort of summarise it in 10 minutes. So thank you for sharing your experience. And I'm look forward to welcoming you back for the chat, the Q&A in a moment, because I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about inclusion and adaptive teaching. So thank you so much, and see you in a moment.
See you in a bit.
Thank you. Okay. And then we've got Paul now, who's had some tech issues, so we're hoping that it will work. So I'm going to add him in and see if it works. Paul,
hello.
Are you there? Lovely. That's great to hear.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for joining us. So Paul is a secondary trainee as well, a secondary geography trainee who's recently sort of at the end of his teacher training and actually moving across the country for his first teaching post from where he's originally based. Paul is going to talk about the important topic of professionalism and wider school life. You don't have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to hand over to you. And like I said, any other questions for any of our guests, please put them in, because after Paul's finished, we're going to add Danny and Julia back in for a Q&A with our first three speakers. So thank you, Paul, for joining us as well. And over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Ben, and really good morning to all of you. As Ben introduced me, I'm Paul. I've done the secondary geography PGCE course. So the caveat to all that follows is that that's the context that I'm speaking from. And so please do ask any questions if you're going to be a secondary trainee or a geography trainee about professionalism. And we've heard lots so far this morning, super event. I would have really benefited from this time last year, about life in the classroom, setting high expectations in teaching and learning, promoting good progress and being accountable for students' learning. And we'll go on to think about behaviour management strategies in the classroom, lesson planning and delivery. But it falls to me to talk a little bit about life outside the classroom. That's standard 8, fulfilling wider professional responsibilities, making a positive contribution to the wider life and ethos of the school, developing effective professional relationships with colleagues, deploying support staff effectively, taking responsibility for improving teaching through appropriate professional development, and communicating effectively with parents. Now, you might say that standard 8 is all those bits about teaching which don't really fit in with anything else. And in my experience, that's the way that they're viewed in training as well. More than the other standards, these were assumed. They were things that it was just assumed that we would do. It was expected that on placement in school, we just pick this up by some sort of osmosis. So what do I wish I'd known? Well, I'm going to take you through each of the standards under standard 8 in turn and have a little think about them. So the first one, making a positive contribution to the wider life and ethos of the school. I think firstly, what's really important here is just having an awareness of the wider life and ethos of your placement school. Ethos is one of those things that everybody talks about and nobody really knows what it means. Well, it's quite hard to pin down, but it's something to do with the culture of the school, perhaps best manifested in a school's values. I used to enjoy going on holiday to the seaside, maybe you do too, to Blackpool, somewhere like that. Blackpool Rock, that awful licorice sweet where it says Blackpool in it, and wherever you cut the sweet, it still says Blackpool through the middle. Well, if you were to take a student from your placement school and cut them in half, metaphorically speaking, of course, you would see the values, the culture, the ethos of the school embedded in them. That's how I like to think of it anyway. So showing an awareness of that is a good starting point. But how do you do that? Well, I think having a good overview of what goes on at the school comes from researching it carefully, perhaps via the school website. Bear with me on this one, but Mumsnet is really very useful because quite often on there they have a stream about their local secondary school and mums are chatting about it, and it gives you a sense of the culture of the place. And of course, there's no substitute for just being there, experiencing it, picking up the vibe of the place. Now, that's kind of the ethos. What about the wider school life? Well, chat to your students about what they do out in the classroom. It might be extracurricular activities. Chat to your colleagues too about what they lead on. They will love to talk to you about it, and it's a great way of developing rapport with your students as well, to chat with them about chess club or Model United Nations or orchestra or football or badminton, whatever they do. They'll love to talk to you about it. And actually, by taking an interest, you're already making a positive contribution by encouraging them in that wider school life. Of course, a step further would then be to be involved in running something, although I warn against doing it too soon. The training year is a busy one. Don't overload yourself. It's really important for your mental and physical health that you don't. So find your feet first, and then if you do have the capacity and time to commit to something, do one thing really well. So my first placement, I didn't do anything up until October half term, and then after October half term, I went along to the Christian Union meeting until Christmas. Spring term on my second placement, a bit trickier with the lockdown and teaching online. But the sixth form were doing their EPQs, Extended Project Qualification, and just going along and listening to some of the presentations that they were putting together. It was a way to contribute to the wider life of the school. So that's contribution, making a positive contribution. Number two, developing effective professional relationships with colleagues and knowing how and when to draw on advice and specialist support. And I think the key here is being a professional. Your mentor in school, your colleagues in school are just that, mentor and colleagues, and shouldn't be probably treated with the familiarity of friends. Engage with them about life in school first, rather than beyond it. Now, of course, in time, it might be that more personal details emerge about their family or what they get up to at the weekend, but I wouldn't suggest that you go looking for that. Engage with them about the teaching and learning and school life in the first instance. And then knowing how and when to draw on their advice and support is closely related to this. School email or a message on their e-learning platform, my placement, it was Microsoft Teams, is going to be most appropriate. Now, I'm not married, and so I can devote all hours of the day and night sometimes to thinking about teaching. Well, of course, that's not the same for all of my colleagues. So establishing boundaries is really helpful as well, saying you'll only email somebody between 7 AM in the morning and 7 PM at night. Or if you email at the weekend, not expecting an immediate reply. After all, they might be with their family or out doing things with friends. I think the best policy for asking for advice and support is to do it well in advance of needing it and face-to-face. Follow it up with an email as well. Busy people, busy teachers need the reminder. And of course, it may be that you need something quite immediately. For example, a safeguarding concern. Well, that is a real priority and it's urgent, and so you must go and seek the support immediately. But that date that you've forgotten for the July 1967 race riot in Detroit that you need for a Year 12 lesson in 10 weeks' time, well, it's really not a priority. I think having priorities clear is a really great way of thinking about whether or not you need to ask for that support. Thirdly, deploying support staff effectively. Mainly we'll be working with teaching assistants in a secondary school context, supporting students with special educational needs. And it's very much about partnership. Get to know your students and their individual needs and involve the support staff in that process. So early on, I met with Jeanette, not her real name, to be able to ask her a little bit about Joanne, not her real name, a student that I was working with in Year 8, what strategies were most effective in supporting their progress. And Jeanette was able to say that they were quite good with their spoken contributions, but they needed structured support for writing. And in time for the next lesson, I was then able to get in touch with the teaching support lady, give her a sheet of sentence starts to use, and also involve her a little bit more in the classroom as well, trying to not just have her working with that one individual, but with small groups and even using support staff as an extra body to support the learning of the whole class as well. More briefly, taking responsibility for improving teaching through appropriate professional development, responding to advice and feedback from colleagues. I think just be involved with it. Professional development will come up depending on which school you're in at different time points. My first placement school, it was every Wednesday afternoon. At second school, it was less frequent than that. It was once a half term. But attending that staff training was great, and it was great to engage with it, writing notes, asking questions of the speakers. Now, Sir Francis Bacon once wrote that knowledge is power, and as trainees, very often you have a great insight, new knowledge at the forefront of teaching and learning. And so sometimes you actually might be able to contribute to that professional development as well, not just learn from your colleagues, but be able to say, oh, well, on the course, we've learned this, or I've done this little bit of reading, or somebody on Twitter put this up, or Instagram, I saw this. And you're then able to share that practice with your colleagues, and they will really appreciate it. So you can positively contribute to professional development as well as just benefiting from it. Responding to advice and feedback is critical, and it's about doing just that. It may be to implement an immediate change. It may be to go back to somebody who's given you feedback on a lesson observation and ask them for some clarification. Actually, what did you mean by this? Or can you just help me to see this a little bit more in my next lesson that you observe? And of course, we need to be careful in the way that we do this as trainees, with an attitude of humility, but you might actually be able to question some of the feedback that somebody's given you, saying that you perhaps disagree in the politest possible way. You might have evidence to suggest that something that they'd seen in the class wasn't quite right, or wasn't the perspective that you had on it, and you might be able to enter a bit of a dialogue with them about that. And then finally, communicating with parents with regard to achievement and well-being. It's worth saying that this communication can either be positive or negative. It could be that you're ringing to say, really well done on a particular piece of work or something in a lesson. Or it might be saying, actually, progress has slipped a little bit. We need to work on this together. It could be that this communication with parents is relatively informal, a phone call, an email, or it could be an annual informal parents' evening. And my advice to you on this would be to first of all observe somebody do it. Ask your mentor or a colleague in the department if they're making phone calls home or leading a discussion in a parents' evening, just to ask, would it please be possible for me to sit in on that and listen to the way that you do it? I think then having had that experience of observing and built your confidence that this is something that you could do, scripting is really important. So if you want to choose one child from your year 9 class who's done something really excellent, perhaps produced an excellent essay, write out exactly what you'd like to say to the parent, and maybe ask again that same colleague that you observed to sit with you as you pick up the phone and talk to the parent with your script in your hand, so you have the structure of where you're going in that conversation. It's a great support and scaffold to you in making that communication. Well, anyway, that's a little race through there of those 5 aspects of that standard 8 of professional behaviours. Real race through, so do ask questions about it when we have chance in a moment. It's a huge privilege to be a teacher. I'm sure everybody would say that, Ben would agree, and others. But it is also a responsibility, and it's important to fulfil our wider professional responsibility. So all the best with it. Enjoy every moment, enjoy the privilege, but make sure that you take responsibility as well.
Thank you so much, Paul. And like you said there's so much to thinking about the wider role of a teacher beyond teaching. That you did give us a real whistle-stop tour there of all the different things of working with colleagues, of professional development, working with parents, and all that. And I think that's really, really good thing to share as well. So thank you, Paul. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions coming through the chat from there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a 15-minute Q&A session with our first 3 speakers. So I'm just going to bring our other 2 speakers in, Paul and Danny. So we've got Paul, so I'm going to add Danny and Julia in as well. What I've done is I've started to collate some of the questions that we've already had, so I'll just put them to each of you, but feel free to add any more questions that you have. So Julia, I'm going to start with you. some people have been asking about the teacher standards. Obviously, what I want to say is we've based a lot of our presentations around the themes of the teacher standards, which are only in place in England. But what we're all talking about today is relevant for across teaching across the world. So I don't want people to think that it's just an England-based event. It's not. We've just based it around that. So I just wanted to say, explain that. But Julia, with regards to the teacher standards or whatever any other, say, countries or areas use for their standards of teaching, what do trainees need to know about them before they begin their teacher training, do you think?
I think before you start your training, I think the main thing is to just be aware of them. You can just put it into Google, the teacher standards, and there's a really good poster with all of them on. It's just one A4 sheet and all of them are on there, and just sort of what each one is about. So to just be aware of them, maybe highlight them a bit before you go in. But then once you start your placements, they'll give you guidance on working towards them, and usually your targets are directly related to them as well. So you should be working more on this aspect of TS2, this aspect of TS5. So it's not something to worry about too much. I think just before your placement starts, just to read through them, be aware of them. And even for those international teachers that might not use that structure, I think it's a really good document to follow as well, because I feel like just following all those standards does make you a really well-rounded teacher. So even if it's not used in systems abroad, I definitely think it's worth reading them and being aware of them.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think one thing, it's quite natural when you start your teacher training, whatever training you do, that you get presented these teacher standards usually probably in the first week, and you feel like by the end of that week you need to know them back to front. But one of our tutors says by the end of your training you'll know them, whether that be back to front, whether that be, you'll be able to reiterate them, and it just comes with time. So thank you, Julia. Paul, I'm going to come to you next. What in your experience as a trainee, because obviously you alluded to that in your teacher training, you might not deal directly with parents because you'll be working with a teacher or a mentor. So what sort of things would you suggest getting involved with regards to parents, or is there any tips? I know you gave some in your presentation there. Any key tips on sort of keeping parents engaged with children's learning?
Absolutely. I think it's really important that it is a partnership between you as a teacher and them at home. They do spend so much more time with the children at home in the evenings and weekends than you ever do in school. I'd say that in the first part of the training year, not to worry about it too much, actually. I think that would be the message with a lot of the wider kind of school professionalism stuff, because it's just another thing to think about when it's a whole new world and you've got a lot on your plate, getting used to or getting to grips with things going on in the classroom. I think parents' evenings are a great place to start. They are scheduled in most schools, and of course they're online mostly now, rather than actually being a face-to-face meeting. It means you can just sit in a Zoom call or a Teams meeting, and you can hear what's going on, exactly how your mentor or a colleague in the department structures the conversation, and I think that's just a really great way of showing your face as well to parents, so that they kind of realise what you're about, and you get to experience a little bit of that interaction between school and home. If you have opportunity to work with a tutor group as well, a form tutor group, that's another possible way that you might have some experience of speaking with home as well, because you get sort of notes in children's planners, and you can reply to those, or just have a sense of what's parents are doing to communicate with the schools and with tutors. Yeah.
Fantastic, thanks, Paul. Danny, I'm going to come to you next. So we had a question from somebody who said, when you do your teacher training, obviously this will differ from provider to provider, potentially different routes as well, whether that's primary, secondary, or whether you do a 3-year degree or a PGCE or whatever route you follow. Do you get taught about specific special educational needs, and what could you do if you don't, or you need more information potentially?
No, the short answer is no, you don't. And if you actually looked at a list of SEND, it's probably 2 or 3 pages long. But if you looked at a list of SEND and the different kind of issues that students have with different diagnoses, a lot of crossover. I will say, don't focus on the diagnoses that the students got. Get to know the student, work out what works for them. That's a really key point. There is loads of different things that you can read. There's really good books. There's a book called, I haven't got it with me because I'm at my parents' house, but it's called the Send Inclusion Classroom or something. That's really good. And I might still have it from my old mentor. I've basically got a massive PowerPoint with loads of SEND things on, and I'm happy to share that with you if you want it. But essentially, no, it's kind of, you could be faced, if you're a primary or a secondary teacher in a mainstream school, you probably tend to come across like kids with autism, or one that's kind of coming to light a lot more now is pathological demand avoidance, also known as PDA, which is quite difficult to deal with because the kids don't want to do what you're asking them to do because they're avoiding what you want them to do. But yeah, there's lots of different diagnoses, but again, as I said, they all cross over. But it does have to, if it's something that you're really interested in, and your school don't necessarily kind of offer loads of training in it, I would say go and read about it or find CPD courses to do, because it's an ever growing situation and things are always changing, and tap into your Senko as well, they'll know stuff. So yeah.
Fantastic, thank you, Danny. Yeah, and I think that the Senko, and that links to what Paul's been talking about those relationships with your wider colleagues, and you might even have, so if you're in a secondary school, you're more likely to have a SEND team of professionals, whereas in a primary school, you might just have a Senko, who will be one member of staff who coordinates and leads on inclusion and special educational needs. But that key message of remembering the child, not the diagnosis. You might have 3 children with autism in your class who are all very different and have very different needs. And I think that's the key thing, that it's impossible to know every special educational need and be trained on it, because otherwise you'd probably need a couple of years to, I mean, you can do whole degrees on SEND alone. So I think that's a really important message to remember. So thank you, Danny. Next question that then we have, and I suppose it links to yours presentation, Paul, a bit, but I'd be interested to hear Julia's view from a primary perspective as well, all about boundaries and professional boundaries. And as a primary trainee myself, and working as an unqualified teacher at the moment in a primary school, you know, children are very inquisitive no matter what age they're at. So how do we set those boundaries with regards to sort of our professional lives with colleagues and children? So Paul, I'll come to you first, and then Julia, if I'll come to you to sort of have that secondary and primary perspective, if that's okay. So Paul, how would you recommend doing that?
Yeah, it's very, very hard, because boundaries are blurred, and naturally you want to get to know the students, and they'll want to get to know you in order to develop a rapport with them to actually be able to teach them effectively. And giving a little bit of yourself goes a long way, actually. Telling them things that you're interested in, or things that you might have been up to at the weekend. As a geographer, it's quite easy for me to do, because I'm naturally looking at things in the world around me and saying, oh, I saw a fantastic example of the Oxbow Lake at the weekend, or what have you, and communicating that to students, and there's an engagement there. I think remembering that being friendly is important, but that they're not your friends. I've heard that mantra. I think that's a helpful one. I think making sure that you have good friends of your own age stage outside of school context is also going to be helpful with preventing you from slipping into that mentality, either with your colleagues or with the students themselves. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what Julia says.
Yeah, Julia, what would you say? Obviously, younger children are incredibly inquisitive. So what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think, I'd agree with Paul. It's sort of about being friendly, but they're not your friends at the same time, which as a student, I think a lot of people struggle with, because when you're just observing or you're just at the back of the classroom, it's quite easy to not take on the sort of teacher persona as much, and them to see you more as a friend, someone to help, someone that's a friend. So it's important to remember that as well. So yeah, I'd agree with Paul. And then if there's anything, a question that does come up, just being clear. It's just like setting a boundary, like in any other area in your life. Sorry, I'm not happy to share that, which is something that children need to learn from a young age anyway. And it's a good example to set for them, because they'll come across situations similar in their own life if they're not comfortable with sharing something. That being strong and saying, you know, no, that's not something I'm comfortable to share, which I think is just a good example to set. And then I just add as well, with social media as well, not using, like, taking your second name off your Facebook, or having nothing posted that's personal. Not only because children might be curious and search their teachers online, but also the parents as well. And just making sure there's nothing you wouldn't want to share online.
I think that's a really key one. And we were going to have, unfortunately, Davina, who unfortunately couldn't make today, was going to talk about personal and professional conduct as well, which I think sort of overlaps with some of the things that Paul spoke in his presentation, but also what you just spoke about there, Julia. So yeah, social media, whilst it's really good way of, like, you know, our network wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for social media and teachers using social media. But yeah, having those clear boundaries, I think, works really well. So thank you both of you for that. What I'm going to do now, there are still some more questions in the chat that I'm going to come to, but what Lima, who's running our social media from Dubai this morning, who's one of our network leaders, who's based in the Middle East, she's put a story on Instagram, and there's some questions through there as well. But one of the things she put on is about things that people are nervous about for starting their teacher training. And one of them was observations. So Danny, how do you overcome the fear of observations, or can't you? What would you recommend?
So I still remember my first observation, and I'd really got to know my mentor, because of COVID, I didn't officially have one until 6 weeks into my training. So I'd really got to know her. So I felt quite comfortable with her. But I remember feeling really nervous, and then it kind of just goes away, because you go into kind of you forget that they're there, and you're just like, oh, okay, I've got to teach the kids now. And I was okay with it. And then I had to go and do an interview for a job. I did 2 interviews, and I was quite lucky I got both. But inside, I felt like I was giving the worst performance as a teacher ever. But apparently I was okay. So I think it's just, you've got to just stay calm, and just, you're teaching the kids. You've got to try and forget that they're there. They're not looking, they're not trying to catch you out. They're just there to make sure that you're ticking the boxes. So yeah, and they want you to do well. They don't want to trip you up at all.
Yeah.
So as much as it's hard, try and forget that they're there and focus on the kids, because the kids need you to focus on them as well. So yeah.
I think that
I don't think it'll ever get any easier though, because I know I'm pretty sure that my new school's going to have an Ofsted next year, and I'm already thinking about it. So
I think the thing to remember is
it's hard.
They are hard, but that you probably will have more observations more regularly in your training than you will as a qualified teacher. Whereas on teacher training, often is you have to be observed, say, once a week. That doesn't happen in schools. It's normally, say, once a half term, depending on your role and that. And I think that also as a trainee teacher myself, I've tried to get into the mindset of this through my teacher training. This is the time when you only have another qualified teacher in the classroom who's often very experienced, who's giving you that feedback. When you're then come, like I'm going to be, and we're all going to be in September, when we're qualified teachers and we're on our own, actually there is no one to give us that feedback apart from the children usually. And if you've got a TA, then you might have that chance as well. So it's about being reflective. And also, I think if something hasn't gone well, sort of what are you going to do to fix it, not to dwell on it, sort of thing, in a way. Yeah, so I think observations, as much as they can be quite scary, take them as a real good learning opportunity. And also when you get those points for development afterwards, not thinking like, oh, in my next lesson, I must address all 3 of those points, because actually some of those things can come with time and come with confidence as well. And one tip I got was when I did my first placement, my mentor said to me, get your teacher to observe you before you need to have an observation. So I got observed the week before I needed an official observation. And actually that was really good because then I could address things in my first official observation as well. So thank you. Right, well, that is the first part of the morning. There's still some more questions in the chat. So what I will say is I will pop Paul, Julia's and Danny's social media links into the chat. We're going to have a quick comfort break just until 12 o'clock, and then we're going to have a panel discussion about behaviour, because unfortunately Rianne, who's going to present on behaviour, is unfortunately unable to join us this morning. So myself, Hannah, and a couple of others, who's one of our later speakers, are going to come on and talk about behaviour. So I'd just like to say another thank you to Paul, Danny and Julia for opening this morning for their events. So feel free, anyone, to get a drink, pop any more questions you've got in the chat, check out the social media accounts this morning for our speakers and for us as well. And we will see you in a couple of minutes at 12 o'clock. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Ben.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, welcome back everybody, and we are now going to have a short panel on behaviour. Unfortunately, Rianne, who was our speaker on behaviour, isn't able to join us now. So Julia, who we've already met, which I think links perfectly to her presentation on high expectations, is going to join us and talk about behaviour. And also we are joined by Hannah, who is who's going to be speaking about a section for 10 minutes after this 10-minute discussion, all about subject and curriculum knowledge. Hannah's going to be talking about in a moment, but for now we're going to talk about behaviour. And whilst the three of us are all primary trainees, what we want to do, and I know some people have asked about that in the chat, is everything that we've done today, regardless of whether we're a primary trainee, secondary, further education or special training, they all link across the phases. They just look slightly different. So there's some golden threads that go through this event this morning. So hopefully we'll be able to translate it into secondary for you as well. But I'll be interested to hear, Hannah, your perspective, because Hannah, you're a first year trainee. So you've just completed your first year of a primary, or EYFS, as I should have said, as well as primary. Sorry, Lime, who's just added to the chat. So Hannah, you've just started your you've just finished, your first year of university doing primary education, and your first placement. And how did you feel? I think you're probably the best out of all of the speakers today to probably relate most to our attendees who are just about to start out in September. How did you feel about behaviour before you started, and was it as bad as what you thought it was going to be?
Well, I've worked with children for quite a few years, so I was kind of I had an expectation of what it would be like when I first went on placement, but it was very different. I used to work in like a sports situation, and the way you handle behaviour then is a lot different in the classroom, because more likely you've only got 10 children in a sports team, whereas in a classroom you've got 30 to manage all at the same time. So when there's one misbehaving, I felt like when I was on placement, I had to kind of adapt how I manage behaviour depending on the child, and it was really hard to understand first. And until I'd got to know the children, it was quite difficult to understand how to manage that behaviour until you know how they will react to the way you manage it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's all about what you're alluding to is relationships, and I think I found through my teacher training that a lot of schools now are moving towards their behaviour policy more towards a relational restorative approach, as opposed to a very punishment driven warning based approach. And I think one of the other things that I sort of felt as a trainee when I first went on my first placement, because you're a trainee and you want to show a school how good you are and what you can do, and you're thinking about in the future you want to get a job, you feel like you have to do all these amazing things with behaviour, and actually what children need is consistency. They need you. At first they just need, the one thing that my teacher said is, what I would suggest is just copy what I do, and the only difference is it's a different adult doing it, but it shows that we expect exactly the same. So my first teacher, he used to do a thing where he would say, who's got a quiet hand that can tell me the answer, rather than the child who shouts out all the time, and I would and that sort of thing. And actually then it eventually gets all the children put their hand up because they all want to answer. And I think that's a really interesting. So Julia, from the opposite end, you've just finished all of your teaching placements and you're now thinking of going obviously into class as a class teacher. What do you think is the most important thing that you've learned through your teacher training that you're going to take into the classroom?
Yeah, I think something that really stuck with me is someone once told me, treat behaviour as if it's a subject in itself. Don't expect it to be perfect straight away. It's something that the children need to learn as well, and it comes with time and consistency, and they'll learn to do that. I definitely think consistency is key. And then if you're sort of repeating the same rules and have the same methods, and it's something that they'll learn and pick up on, and it'll eventually become fluent in terms of routines, behaviours and things that you establish in the classroom. And as well, having worked in schools where some of the children's, parenting may not have been as good at home, and where there was really poor behaviour, it's modeling the behavior and letting them know why, they're giving them a why again. Why am I telling you to do this? Because saying be good, if you just say be good, it's sort of like some children don't know what being good means. You need to tell them why. What is the effect this is going to have? Why should we be good? If someone's upset someone, why do you think you shouldn't do that? Asking questions like that, getting them to think about their behaviour as well is something that helps.
And I think like that's a really interesting point about it being a subject in itself, that we need to teach children how to behave. And I think at the moment, like when we've got children who in some cases are in and out of school because of, you know, bubble closures and lockdowns and stuff, actually it's about re-regulating them each day in some cases, and making sure that we as teachers, or we have that growth mindset towards behaviour, that we don't think it can't be achieved. Because you might be like, oh, that child, he can never sit on a seat, like he can never sit still for longer than 5 minutes, and that already is then limiting what that child can do. So I suppose it comes a lot to us as well, doesn't it, in that way, I suppose. Yeah, it's fantastic. So with regards to then to training, Hannah, what sort of training have you had? I know you're only obviously in your first year, so you won't have had the full breadth of training. What sort of things did you get with regards to behaviour management? What sort of training did you get? And I'll just say, just before I give you the chance to answer, if anyone does have any questions about this, feel free to pop them in the chat and we can put them to our speakers as well. So yeah, Hannah, what sort of training did you get?
I mean, we did a prevent training course. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but that was more like how to recognise where the behaviour is coming from at home. And we just kind of got told the language to use, and we read documents. We didn't really have any specific training as such, because it was so like online in person at university. So it was very difficult for them to have us all there. But we just more got taught the language that we need to use, rather than don't do that, or why don't you do this instead, or let's put our hands up instead of don't shout out. Like, it's more like the way we say it, we got taught. And yeah, it kind of links all into safeguarding, I feel like, as well. And we've done like safeguarding courses, and I feel like recognizing those safeguarding issues can also sometimes link to the behaviour that the children's had. So if you are able to recognise safeguarding issues at home and then linking that, okay, maybe that's why they're acting up, or just having that like ability to recognise that, I feel like it's important too.
Yeah, fantastic. And Julia, also you at the end of your training, what sort of things have you learnt? And by that I mean sort of on placement and in sort of university training based as well.
Yeah, I think where I learned most was from experience, from observing other teachers, copying their strategies, and just, from being exposed to different experiences and different children. I think that's how I learned the most, and different children respond to different things as well. So just looking out for them, picking them up, trying to replicate them in your own practice, and then bringing them forward. Yeah.
And I think with that experience, it's like different schools and different ways they manage behaviour. Each behaviour policy is slightly unique to that school, and then you sort of pick out, well, what sort of school, when I'm looking for a job, what sort of school am I looking for? So I wanted a school that had a more relational approach and used restorative practice rather than, more suppose you'd call it a punishment-driven approach. I don't know if that's the right term, but that was like something that was really important for me. And someone's just put in the chat, which I think is a great book for behaviour, which I read in my teacher training, When the Adults Change, Everything Changes by Paul Dix, which is a really good book all about adults having that ownership. And my placement school, where I did my second and third placement at, they actually rewrote their behaviour policy based around that book. And I know a couple of other schools that have done that as well. So that's a really good book. So if you're going to buy any book about behaviour, I'd recommend that. And also our Keynote, her book, where what they didn't teach me on PGCE, that's a really good book in general, but there is so many sections that would link to behaviour, and we've touched on safeguarding there as well, and that sort of thing as well. So thank you, Hannah and Julia, for that discussion. So I'm now going to take Julia out of the stream. So thank you, Julia, for your presentation this morning and for coming on for this behaviour panel as well at the last minute. It's been really useful. Any other questions, obviously, about behaviour, feel free, or any of the other topics that we've covered, feel free to pop them in the comments because we can collate them afterwards as well. So thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm now going to hand over to Hannah. So Hannah, who saved the day at the last minute yesterday by agreeing to come on and talk. So as I said, Hannah is a first year trainee. We're coming to the end of her first year. And this is one of the areas we knew behaviour would be a topic that would be a very popular topic that people want to talk about. This was also another one which people said all about subject and curriculum knowledge. And obviously Hannah's got a primary perspective where she's thinking about all the subjects. And we understand some of you may be thinking about a specific subject at secondary. So Hannah's going to sort of talk from the heart, so to speak, because she's only had a little time to prepare about what she wished she'd had known prior to teacher training about subjects and curriculum knowledge. So Hannah, thank you again, and I'll hand the mic over to you.
Hello everybody, so as Ben said, I'm Hannah. I am a first year student and I'm going through the primary initial teacher education degree route, and have just finished my first year. I've just finished my first placement as well. So before I came to uni, I had no idea of what the expectations were when it came to subject knowledge. I know from secondary school that it's a lot more specific and in-depth knowledge, whereas for primary, I feel as it's a much more of a broad approach. And I just didn't realise the importance of it. And obviously now I can look back and see actually subject knowledge is one of the most important things to have as a teacher, because if you don't have that subject knowledge as such, it's harder to build the trust with the students, because they need that confidence in you that if they have a question, you can answer it, or at least lead them in the right direction to answer that question. So I went on placement in sixth form, which was before university, just to kind of get an idea of what it was like. But it wasn't a very regular placement. It was just once a week, and I was always thrown in different year groups. So I didn't really come to university with a full understanding of what subject knowledge was required. I had no idea there was such a thing as the EYFS. I understood there was a national curriculum, but I had just assumed that it went from nursery all the way throughout the school system. I had no concept of it at all. So that was quite a big shock when I came to university. So I really wish I'd at least known what that was, especially because I'm doing the early years pathway as well. So it would have been really useful to have known that. But it is the same idea. It's just a lot more based on the actual skills that the children need to learn, like communication and understanding of the world, rather than, okay, they need to know these numbers, they need to know these words, these phonics. And also this all links in really closely with the teacher standards, because we need to, as teachers, have the ability to adapt our teaching of the subject knowledge to the needs of different children. When you're doing work, if there's different learning objectives you need for children that need extra help, you need to be able to quickly think, right, I can get that off the UFS, I know that, so it's just on the top of your head, which is what I wish I knew when I came to university, because you'll be in lectures and it's like, right, can you try and plan an RE lesson for this age group? And then some of the boxes on the lesson plan, I was like, what goes there? So it's really important, if you are about to start university or your first year, just recap the EYFS or the national curriculum, whichever kind of age group you're going to teach. But it's important to have an understanding of both, because, for example, if you're in year one, they're obviously coming out of the EYFS at this point, but into the national curriculum, but some of them might still be in the EYFS kind of range. So it's important to have that baseline understanding of the EYFS, so you know where your children will be at when they join you in year one, or where some of them might still need that extra push to get into the national curriculum level. So I kind of had a bit of a gauge before I came to uni, but not as much as I would have liked when I actually started in September. So before placement, to help myself prepare, I really studied the national curriculum and the EYFS, because I knew I could have been in nursery reception year one or year two. So I knew it was important to have a good insight into the EYFS as well as the national curriculum, because I knew that when I was doing lesson plans, or even for like teacher observations, when you write in what the learning objective is, or if it's like a specific or primary area, you need to know what part of the EYFS it's from, or what part of the national curriculum it's from. So I really looked into that, and then when I found out I was in reception, I knew, right, okay, well now I can focus on just the EYFS, because although they're at the end of the year, they've missed so much schools because of Corona that the likelihood is they're not quite in that preparation stage for year one yet. They will still all be in the EYFS. So I really looked into that. So I knew that when I was going to be doing lesson plans, I knew what would be going in there. I'm not sure if it's the same at other universities as well, but at the one I'm at, we have subject audits at the start and midway through first year. Well, it's every year, but it's at the start of the year and then midway. And these are audits, so they're like subject knowledge tests. And we have a science one, a phonics, an English and a maths one, which we do and then gets marked, and we get a percentage grade kind of thing. And you can then really clearly see there where your weaknesses are. And I think it would have been useful for these kind of audits to be available online before we even start university in first year, so that over summer, before I could have just had a go at one of them and seen, okay, right, well, I'm actually quite weak at that area of maths. I'll just have a go at some questions on it just to make sure I know. Because although it's not that in-depth knowledge required, I feel like you get those children that say, but why? Oh, yeah, and you answer and they go, no, but why though, miss? But why? And I love how curious they are, but it's important then that we have that really, really in-depth knowledge, because that why can go on for a very long time, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware of. And if they don't get that answer that they're satisfied with, they will keep pestering you. So you either need to have that in-depth knowledge about whatever it is. It's often something like animals or just something they're really interested in, but all have the ability to say, oh, okay, I'm not sure on the answer. Why don't we research that together? Or why don't you go home and try and look up the answer and come tell me in the morning if there is. That's my go-to. If I suddenly panicked and realised I haven't got the in-depth knowledge for this, you just need to have the ability to recognise, okay, well, I'm not going to give them a suitable answer, so I need them to find out for themselves, or we can do it together. And it can be you can set it as kind of a little homework task, like, well, why don't you go home and research this for me? And often the children will find this quite exciting, that they've got this little task that they've got to do, and they can come in and tell you what they found out in the morning. And I had a little boy in placement who loved this. Every day he'd go home, and the next morning he'd come and tell me a fact about this new fish he'd found out. And that was teaching me things. I've learned all about these fish over 3 weeks. It's great. But some tips I would give in preparation for placement or in preparation for university is to just, and when you're on placement especially, is observe other teachers. So I got lucky and had an opportunity to go into a science lesson in year 2 class. And that was really, really interesting, because in reception, they don't do too much on science. And when I took over English in reception, I went and sat down with the English lead, and I went through my lesson plans so that I could understand and go through what I'd done and check it was right. So when you're on placement, use the people you're with, because it's really important to collate everything they know and learn from them, and just use that wider community to give you ideas and support you, rather than feeling independent. Like, they're there to help you, and your lecturers as well. If you've got ideas or they've got ideas, go and ask them, just talk to them. They're there to help you. But yeah, so my main point is just use the people around you, and just make sure you have a way to say to children, why don't we look at this another day, or another way, or try to find this out, and just have that in-depth knowledge as much as you can. But yeah, thank you for listening to me, everybody.
Thank you, Hannah. That was fantastic. And you can tell this is a really important topic, because the amount of comments we're getting through the chat is brilliant. And one of the things I would say is, people, don't expect when you go on a primary teacher, especially a primary route, as a primary teacher training route, that you have to know everything, and you're going to know everything by the end of that teacher training, because you'll go into school when you work with teachers and you'll find that actually teachers have to prep and revise topics each year. And the way I sort of think of it is, if we were expected to know every subject. Our degree would have, for every year group, our degree would have to be about 8 years long to cover every year group in primary or secondary. So don't worry at all. But yeah, you're getting lots of great comments in the chat. So thank you, Hannah. And we'll answer some of those questions in the Q&A with you, Jake, and Nia at the end of this slot. So thank you, Hannah, and we'll see you back in a bit.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, brilliant. That was absolutely fantastic. So the next person we've got is Jake, and Jake is just come to the end of his 3-year primary degree. He's also a trained early years educator. Hello, Jake. Thank you for joining us.
How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. And Jake is going to talk all about assessment. And this is notoriously one of the areas that I think I've probably found quite hard as a trainee. And I think it's one of the areas that you learn a lot, we will all learn a lot about when we become teachers. So Jake, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ben. Just a little bit of background for myself before I start. Originally, I was an early years educator, so I was able to pick up points through the EYFS and be able to put formative and summative assessment for children so they were ready for reception. For the last 3 years, I have been doing my primary education degree. I'm actually finishing next week, which is exciting. And I've also got an early career teacher job at a new multi-academy trust, which is excellent. I think the one thing from my teacher training years with regards to assessment is it's so broad and it can be so scary. But I think the one thing that I've picked up over the last 3 years is to shape your assessment to tailor for you. Because when I was going into different placements, for example, in one year, I had to write down every single child's name and write, okay, are they emerging? Are they expecting? Are they succeeding? And I found that to be a huge workload for me, and it was quite stressful. Whereas when I've gone into other placements, I found that, okay, it's quite informal. And I think watching and observing other teachers with their assessment, making sure that obviously you go by the school's policies, but also being able to pick up the points of, okay, well, how can I make this more organic for me? How can I ensure that A, I reduce my workload, and B, how can I get the best of children? And I think originally I thought, right, okay, there was 2 types of assessment. There you got the formative assessment, which is the ongoing assessment with the children. And then you've got the summative assessment, which is at the end. What have they gained at the end of this? And it's much more to what it seems. And it may seem scary, but honestly, it's not scary at all. And you've just been able to learn through it in your own time. I think for me, the main thing, again, was observations. And if you are going into your teacher training years, make sure you make the most out of observations. I'm pretty sure that most of the speakers on here have said that again and again. But I think the one thing that I picked up on in observations is that it's not just marking of books. It's not just picking up the children. It's more than that. I found that I've got a lot out of informal assessment. So, for example, I was able to pick up on how many children have put their hands up, for example, and reading the room and helicoptering and thinking, okay, so who has got it? Who hasn't got it? I think the main thing that I always ask when I go into a placement for my first class, I always go, right, okay, so what are the children that need to be supported? What are the children that might have educational needs and might need to have activities that are differentiated? How am I going to stretch those children that may be expecting or exceeding their expectations and might need a little bit of a push? And particularly this year has been really important because obviously COVID has meant that there has been a school year that has been missed. And the one thing that I have picked up on was to look at other year groups. Now, the national curriculum obviously is a statutory guidance, and you're able to look at the formative assessment of the expectations that are reached by the end of year 1, year 2, and so on. But I found that actually looking at different year groups, so for example, if I'm in a year 4 class, I'll look at their previous knowledge and go, okay, what would they have learned in year 3? And being able to assess that knowledge in the lesson, possibly as a starter activity, for example, where can you see that knowledge and go, right, okay, assess that knowledge there and then. Are they secure in their year 3 knowledge? to bring onto their year 4 knowledge what should they know now. Then if you have got people or children who are exceeding expectations, possibly reaching to the year 5 level, how are you going to stretch those children in for the year 5 expectations so that they're able to pick up on those expectations later on in the year? And when I did my interview for my job, I covered polygons, for example, and it was a year 3 class, and year 2 is a statutory guidance, but in year 3 it's a non-statutory guidance. And they actually said, thank you for covering it, because we haven't covered it in year 2. So being able to pick up on that prior knowledge was vital for you to go into your interview, and then being able to stretch them into year 4 knowledge going forward. So we looked at lines of symmetry, for example, and obviously polygons, looking at it in closed shape, but are they regular? Are they irregular? And being able to pick up on those points, you were able to see straight away that you saw the children that might need a little bit of help, and you might need to push, or you might need to get a TA to support them, or you might be able to go to that group, for example, and being able to stretch them. And I think the beauty of assessment is that everything links, obviously, in the teacher standards. So, for example, that structure of lessons, you're able to judge that upon assessment, the expectations of children, the behaviour. So if you haven't got enough assessment, possibly it might be because the input's too long. How can you make it shorter, but being able to have those children's expectations? I think when I was able to go into my teacher training year as a starter, I think the main thing that I picked up on, we had a lot of seminars based on assessment, but I think you can have all the seminars in the world, you can be taught left, right and centre with your university, but the one thing that I always picked up on was that school was the best way to learn assessment. So please make sure that you have observations to pick up on assessment methods. Even if you ask your mentor, for example, right, I need to pick up on assessment, are you able to help me? And they are going to be able to guide you to think, okay, that teacher is doing that because they have picked up in their previous lessons that they have not been able to understand that. So using their lesson plans, they're able to judge that. So as from a children's perspective, they are able to understand, okay, I understand where I am, I know where I'm going to be going with my learning objectives, and I know when I'm going to get there with their success criteria. And the one thing I learned with assessment was the differences between learning objectives and success criteria. Now, learning objectives, we always found in year 1, that was the most trickiest part, because you're able to pick up on what they're going to learn, but what is their learning objective overall? So, for example, if I was going to look at descriptive writing of a theme park, which I'm doing at the moment, we looked at abandoned theme parks and how can we pick up on those. So the success criteria was looking at the English vocabulary. So, for example, fronted adverbials, or we were going to be able to look up a picture sentence, or they were going to be using the power of 3, which is 3 adjectives, describing 3 adjectives in one sentence, but also a picture sentence. So we describe it as show and not tell. But our learning objective was to be able to use descriptive writing to talk about a abandoned theme park. So that theme is there, but what is your overall aims for your success criteria? And I found that linking to data as well is really important for that aspect. So, for example, I asked my English lead, who was my teacher, can I look at the English data? Can I look at the read, write, ink data? And being able to judge the read, write, ink data to go, right, okay, that child here is not expected. How can we push them to become expected? So, for example, if you've got a colour band, so green, I believe, is a low ability. How are you going to push those children in their read, write, ink groups to be able to be secure in their knowledge to be brought up by the end of year 2, by the end of year 3, by the end of year 4, and everything seems like a domino effect in a way. So, for example, I'm going to bring up an RE lesson. We were covering about the 5 pillars in Islam, and the first thing I said as a starter activity to judge their assessment, so at the start of the unit and to the end of the unit, what do you remember? And I said, right, okay, so what can you remember about Islam? no show of hands whatsoever. And in my gut, I was thinking, oh no. But I was able to pick up on those points and being able to have little tiny points. So it was okay that they didn't know. It's been able to, the teacher was able to go, right, okay, I taught them in year 2. I taught that subject in year 2. Obviously, that isn't secure. So how am I able to have their past knowledge of RE? So what are they going to learn before? How can I bring that as a starter? How can I bring it to year 5 level? How can I bring it as a plenary? So, for example, we were covering the 5 pillars. I was told to write 1 or 2 sentences to explain what the 5 pillars are and why is it important to Muslims. And we were able to watch a video and make notes and do a fun activity for the like drama, for example, but not in that aspect, of course. But then at the end of it, I was able to do, we called it a I can't remember what it's called, we call it a pink to think. And we go, as a plenary, what have you learnt in the last lesson? But one thing I would take away from assessment is observations. I think observations are so key as a teacher going forward, and I have learned so much through assessment, through observations, and just keep, again, just observations, but keep an eye out for data. Always ask your teacher for to how to do data, because by being able to do data, you're able to bring on that prior assessment, that current assessment, and future assessment. But yeah, thank you very much, and if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Thank you, Jake, for that. That was really good. I think a lot of takeaways there of really key, just examples of different methods of behaviour, and I think assessment. And I think that a key message that really stuck with me there is assessment isn't just about marking, and it's not just about that. There's so much more to it. And I think actually, if a big tip that someone gave me on teacher training was, if you want to go and see some assessment experts, go down to the EYFS if you're in a primary school, because the amount of different methods that are used, you'll see. So thank you so much, Jake, and we look forward to adding you into our Q&A panel in a moment.
Thank you.
Okay, and our last speaker our last presentation is by Naya, who is a trainee teacher in further education. So we've had some primary, some secondary. Naya is a further education trainee, and she's going to talk all about the very important topic of lesson planning and lesson delivery, which I think will be another one that we have lots of questions about. So Naya, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, Naya. Can you hear me?
Thank you for having me, Ben.
Brilliant. So I will now leave you to it. Thank you.
Thank you. So hi everyone. So as Ben introduced, I am working in FE and I just completed my PGCE in further education. So today's topic that I was covering is about lesson planning and delivery. I mean, I didn't have a presentation, so you're just going to have to see my face, unfortunately. So with lesson planning, it's quite important, because obviously as early career teachers, because they changed the NQT system this year, it is important that we carefully kind of consider consider seating plans in class. I mean, that's not something we'll know the first day of term, for example. That's something over time we build up in terms of our knowledge. So we need to know who needs to be at the right, at the front of the class, who needs to kind of, what is a good place for those who have additional needs, for example. And, sometimes it might help if you color code your seating plan appropriately in order to kind of meet those needs. Because not only will that help you, for example, if you get observed in a lesson, that also kind of, tells you which students have particular needs that you need to be careful of when you're planning a lesson. So I would also recommend kind of with an actual structure of a lesson that you begin lessons always with a review of the previous lesson, because whether that's in a 5-minute starter, but it's always important that you recall previous learning in order to kind of relate that to also kind of relate that to Bloom's taxonomy as well. Recall, comprehension, knowledge, etc. So I would also recommend in lessons you give new information more than once, especially for example, my subject's health and social care. Yesterday I literally just covered legislation, and that's quite a boring topic, so it's important that we make that interesting for students. Whether they do a poster, group work, it does need to be student-centered in terms of a lesson. So we do need to break down learning into small sequences and give specific examples. Sometimes it needs to be practical. So, for example, in health and social care, I tend to give them either practical experience from my experience or try and get them to relate it to, you know, work experience. Or, well, now we're kind of in COVID, so you can easily link it to that if they're not sick and tired of hearing that word already. So I did kind of think of 8 questions that you, as you know, practitioners, professionals, teachers, trainees, should think about when you are preparing lessons for the next year. So the first one would definitely need to be students, because that's at the centre of what you do. You know, what are the academic, social, physical, personal, and social, you know, emotional needs of the students. So you do need to factor that into account of the lesson, especially if it might be quite a heavy content lesson that could affect someone with emotional needs. Could be, for example, safeguarding. Strategies. So which teaching strategies will help students learn? So you need to think about, you know, how is this particular student going to learn? Is it going to be through a poster, group work, peer-to-peer learning? You know, which teaching strategies are you going to put in place to best help that student or those students in your class? Grouping. So if you do group work, what size of the group should they be? Should it be 3? Should it be like a group of 5? You need to think about which group size you do in terms of group activities, in order to facilitate that learning. So timing. So when is the best time to do the lesson? That's the question. Because sometimes, if it's a heavy content lesson, you know, you can't do that straight away 9 o'clock in the morning, depending on lesson timing. And students might not even be half awake. You know, they might not even be awake at that time. And especially if you have a lesson after lunch, they might be giggly or chatty. So it is careful to, you know, think about the timing of the lesson as well. So you have materials. So what materials and resources do I need for the student, you know, for the lesson to be structured? So what resources do you need? You know, do you need pens, papers, you know, the lesson PowerPoint, poster, you know, scrap paper? You need to think about what materials you need for each lesson. Success. So that this is probably something a little bit after the lesson as a trainee teacher, especially, and teachers. Was the lesson successful and were students interested? So that is a reflection point, which I'm sure in your trainee year you'll come across a lot of reflective writing. And you're never gonna get rid of that reflection, because as you know, as teacher, we tend to reflect on our practice. You know, what has worked well, what hasn't worked well. You know, what could we do better to improve that lesson. So these are sometimes things in lessons that we trial and run. So things that do work, you can keep going forwards with it, and things that don't work, you know, you can either try and improve it, or you can try and, you know, forget it. I'm not going to continue doing this anymore in my lessons. So that also follows on to sequence. So what can I do next time to build up on, you know, on this lesson? How can I make it flow? Because sometimes lessons do need to flow for students to see the links. You know, I learned this last lesson, and this lesson I'm learning this. It's connected with one another. So rationale would be the other one. So what is the reason for doing this? You need to think about, you know, what is the reason that I'm doing this lesson for the students? What is the main purpose? What am I trying to get them to learn? That is quite important, in terms of actually planning the lesson. It needs to be student focused. What I would also say is, in terms of lesson planning and delivery, is that don't reinvent the wheel. I would say is a big one, because, for example, as a trainee teacher, you might not have the time to always create your own resources. So obviously at the start of the academic year, you might have it a bit easy, but as it gets through the academic year, you might struggle with kind of making that time to make your own resources, and it just gets heavy based, especially with the PGCE. You've got assignments constant on the go, students, you're teaching, so not always can you make resources. So it is good to kind of find, you know, at the start of the year, maybe a few tools, online resources where you can build up a bank of resources for you to use in your lessons, depending on which subject you're teaching, for example. So that might be good, because not always can you make your resources, but always what I do say also is, with lesson planning and stuff, it's always good to kind of accredit which source you did take it from as well. Because there have been cases where kind of like, you know, you're using a resource and, you know, you're not accrediting the right person. So that's quite important as well in terms of development overall lesson kind of planner, teacher. So that's, you know, with lesson planning, that's kind of the main things that I have to say about, you know, lesson planning. And one also tip I would also suggest is, as a trainee teacher, as September starts, for example, you might find it hard in seeking a lesson plan template. So what I suggest is, in the preparation for you, you know, between now and September, when you start your, training to teach, find some lesson template plans that you might be happy with, because I know that not all courses might provide you with a lesson plan template. Or, for example, I was lucky to have my mentor at least kind of help me and give me a lesson plan, and I actually liked that lesson plan, so I then used that lesson plan for all my lessons. So then I did try finding lesson plans on my own, and obviously one that I found was a 5-minute lesson plan, and I didn't really like that lesson plan, to be honest with you guys, because it was quite short, and I like going into a lot of detail when it comes to my lessons. So that's one thing I would also recommend. Find your own lesson plan, something that you'll be happy with, and get that ready for the start of the academic year.
Thank you, Naya. That was brilliant. And I think you came up with lots of great tips and examples there. And I think one thing that I found, that when I did my first ever lesson, you plan your first ever lesson, it takes you about 3 hours to plan just one lesson, but it does get easier. I remember mine was the Great Wall of China, because you end up educating yourself first and then having to think what you're going to do and then do all the other bits of planning. So for anyone watching, be aware that your first lesson probably will take a while to plan. But thank you, Naya. And I'm going to add Hannah and Jake back in so that we can do the Q&A. We've had lots of questions with a whole range of things here. So the first one, which also came up through the Instagram that we've been doing as well, and I'm going to put this to Hannah and Naya first, because I think it come off the back of your two presentations, was a lot of people are very much worried about workload, particularly around obviously subject knowledge, having to revise different areas, whether you are primary or secondary, and then of course obviously then deliver lessons as well. So what sort of tips could you give with regards to managing workload that you've sort of picked up? So I'll come to you first, Naya, and then Hannah afterwards, if that's okay. Well, I think Naya might have frozen actually, so I'll just remove her out of the chat. So Hannah, what sort of tip would you come up with as to giving for workload?
Well, I'd say that if you've got placement, it's quite a lot easier to learn subject knowledge kind of in the role on placement. A lot of it comes as you listen to teachers, as you observe teachers, you will learn a lot then. So I wouldn't put pressure on yourself and say, right, okay, before placement, I need to know this, this, and this, because a lot of it you will just learn on the job. But it is important as well, I feel like, to constantly top up that knowledge, like even just reading children's books. I know that sounds really silly, but just to have an understanding of what they're reading, and that doesn't take up too much time. Just every week read a different children's book, maybe just something little, just to keep on top of it.
Fantastic. And now, what would you say as a tip for workload with regards to like lesson planning?
So I would also probably suggest the same, as in you can engage in CPD. Obviously, with me being an FE, kind of working with 60 to 80-year-olds, what I realise is not all organisations have actually a proper kind of lesson plan for it, because obviously it's further education, so it might not be the same as, you know, primary, secondary, and the requirements for a lesson plan. For example, we do it through a scheme of work, but again, in terms of the workload and everything, it's just about using the time wisely. And I also recommend, you know, maybe designating one day in the week where you do your lesson planning for the entire week. Because yes, it might be boring if you sit there for 3-4 hours doing your lesson plans, but if you designate a time the week, you know, for example, a Thursday, you at least know which groups you have covered and which groups actually need a lesson plan for next week, for example. So that's also one thing. You can do it on a Friday if you really want to have a fun Friday doing lesson planning. But I do designate, you know, one day a week, because what I found was throughout my year, you know, I was doing my lesson plans as I was going along each week, especially for my observation lessons. I mean, I was worried about, you know, my observation lessons, so I was trying to get everything done, you know, early as possible. But I do find doing it early as possible does help you keep on top of your game, I would say, as a trainee teacher.
Fantastic, thank you. And Jake, coming to you then, so similar question, sort of how have you found that elements of the sort of the subject knowledge and the lesson planning as well, and what would be your main tip that you would give?
I think in first year, when I was a first year, I would describe it as an eager beaver. I was being able to plan minutes by minutes by minutes, and I got told by my mentor, if you do that, you're going to burn out. And I think what I found was that later on in the years, I found that you do a lesson plan. So you say, okay, 10 minutes I'll do a starter and I'll do this. And in 10 minutes I'll do this. And in half an hour, the children do the activity. And being able to write lesson plans. Now, I've had everything understand, including I've had Ofsted. And if you think about Ofsted don't even look at your lesson plans. But obviously within observations and etc. is vital. I think the one thing that I would say to even reduce workload is to do small points for, okay, so what are you going to teach? What are those specific vocabulary that you are going to use? And how are the children going to learn from it? And how are you going to differentiate it? And I think for me in particular, the lesson plan will not go to plan. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I think I've only had a couple of lessons where they have gone to plan, where I've planned for the week, for example. So I'm going to give an example. This week we were adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators, and they didn't understand it at all. And so I had to strip it back, replan, and do it for the following week with what I've had. So I think the one thing I'll take away with regards to workload is to make short bullet point notes and to make sure that you understand, but also if you are being observed or if somebody picks up your lesson plan, how are they going to understand? And I think that's the most important part, because if the observer can't understand what you're saying, in a way, how are you going to understand, and how are the children going to understand?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point there. And I think especially the point about burning out, I think as trainees, we are all eager because we're so excited, and also we're sort of reliving subjects that we've not relived for many years. And so we get excited by that. I think that's a really good point about that. And I think one of the things that I can't remember if it was Hannah or Nay, you said in your presentations was about using the people around you. So, if you're in a primary school, using the subject leaders for each subject, because that's what they're there for. They're there for you and the teachers to go to. If you are in a secondary school, there'll be different people in the departments that you have that all have their own areas of expertise and specialism. So I think it's really important about using people around you. And this is sort of an open question now, which isn't sort of related to sort of any of your talks, but we've had quite a few questions about imposter syndrome. How have you experienced imposter syndrome as a teacher, as a trainee teacher, and how did you overcome it? And I'm happy for either of you to raise your hand and sort of answer that, if any of you want to.
By that, do you mean like...
Hannah, do you want to go first, and then we'll go to Naya, then we'll go to Jay? That's always the risk when I say that, when it's an open question.
No, I was just going to ask,
with imposter syndrome, I have... Oh, was Hannah talking?
Naya, do you want to carry on, and we'll come to you, Hannah, afterwards? Okay,
that's fine. So with imposter syndrome, there are several points in a trainee year that you do feel like, you can't do this, I'm not good enough. But then what really helps is that if you think back to your previous successes as a person, you got through this, you're on a PGCE year successful, and that all comes with all sorts of interviews and qualifications and checks to go through. So it is always kind of reflecting back on your successes as a person, as a teacher, why do I want to go to teaching? Why am I doing this job? Sometimes you do have to reflect and take that moment, step back and reflect, why am I doing this? Why am I in this classroom right now in front of students, working with them? Why am I doing this job? And that kind of helps re-motivate you. And yes, imposter syndrome can be quite deliberating at times in different points of the year. For example, maybe when you get observed in a lesson, especially, you might think, that observed lesson wasn't good enough, I can't do it. But if we think about this, your trainee year is a year of training. So it's training you to be a good, teacher for your student. And it's, because I know that a lot of people who do a PGCE course are not really experienced that much in education. So you might be coming straight from university, for example, doing the course. So it is, as Ben kind of kindly said as well, it is about knowing the right people that can support you. For example, your mentor, But also I would say, for example, Instagram is a really great place to kind of get that support as well in terms of imposter syndrome, because you relight that passion that you have as a teacher, especially with my if I give an example, my page is all about positivity and kind of handling that kind of growth mindset. So I'm all about that mindset, and kind of I call myself an advocate for that, as I promote it quite a lot. It is all about that mindset. We as teachers need to embed that with not only just ourselves but our students as well. I can do this. I can go. An example I have probably is a student last week just said to me, I can't go to university. I was like, just stop right there. You can go to university and you can become a teacher for health and social care.
Yeah.
So it is about making small changes.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool, and I think there's two big points you made there. Like the one about realizing how magical it is what happens, and that was something my head teacher said to me. He goes, sometimes, Ben, you just need to stop and stand back and watch what's going on in your classroom, because actually it's just it's magical. And that's the thing as teachers, especially at the moment because of COVID and because they've missed school and stuff, we're thinking about that a bit too much. And my second point I've actually totally forgot whilst I was telling you my first point, so I will try and remember whilst I hand over to Hannah. How would you manage to combat imposter syndrome?
I was going to say that I felt like obviously on placement I just felt I got thrown in, so I was like, sometimes I feel like you just have to face it, and as hard as it is, you just have to try and put yourself out there as much as you can. Like first day, try and read something to the class, or take a group, just do it. And then as soon as I feel like you do it once, you think, okay, actually I can do this, and you form more of a positive attitude towards it. Once you do that one small step, that makes you think, okay, actually I think I can teach anyway. It just gives you that little boost of confidence, I feel like. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you, Hannah. I've now remembered my point, but I'll try and remember it after Jake has finished talking. So Jake, your one, what's your piece of advice?
No, I must admit I am quite guilty of imposter syndrome, and I think the three things that I've actually picked up on. One of them was observations, and if you went onto my Instagram, you could see how I've actually kind of brought back in my fear of observations, because I think that's the one thing as teachers you are scared of, being judged. And I think somebody did put on the chat, they said that they're not judging you as a person, it's your performance, and that's exactly that. And I think coming with that is reflection, because when you're being observed, it's like all these hawk-eyes on you, when in reality you're actually just teaching the children to the best of your ability. And what I've found when I was in year 6, for example, my first placement was in year 6, and obviously that's going to be daunting as anything. But the one thing that I thought of was reflecting. Now, I always found that I used to be quite negative, and I think that kind of kicked off my imposter syndrome, thinking, oh my gosh, I can't do this, I can't do this. Whereas actually, as I've progressed throughout the years, I found that actually there were some good points, and I'm able to build up upon it. And then, yes, I've had some bad lessons, but turn it on its head and think, okay, but how can I make this even better? Because you're that teacher in the front of the classroom, and the children look up to you anyway, and they know that you might be nervous, but because you're in the front of the classroom for the first time, but they believe in you and you believe in them. And I think that's the key message. But I think the one thing as well is, please just gather any cards, any notes, any pictures that may put positive thoughts in, because I still have the cards that I have in year 6, and they just put a boost up on my face, and it just picks me back up, and I know that I can do anything. And particularly COVID's been very tricky, so I think that has been vital to keep on going.
Fantastic, thank you, Jake. And I think one of the point that I was failing to remember in the first bit when I was talking about was, I think what we have to remember, especially in the early part of our training, the fact that you've got up in front of that group of children is a big thing, and anything else that happens is then a bonus. And your teachers that are with you will be there to support you, and they will, like me and especially on my first placement, we had this signal in the way we looked at one another, that it was like the help me signal, where you look over and your teacher then pitches in. But actually a lot of teachers I've worked with will know when to pitch in, and also things that not necessarily when you're struggling, but things that you don't even think of that just crop up that the teacher will think. And equally the same might happen when that teacher's teaching and you're doing it as well. And I think that the thing you make with the cards, and Sarah, who's in the studio, who's joining us, and her book here, which if you haven't got, you need to have. A lady in there, Hannah Wilson, who is absolutely fantastic, talks about having a sunshine box where she put all of her things in. And one of her things that she said, which I thought was really interesting, which I added to my school email, is now that everything's electronic, she has a sunshine folder and she calls it A Sunshine, so it goes to the top of your inbox. And I've got one of them, so all the lovely emails that I get, say, from fellow staff or parents or anything like that, just save them, because, you know, when you do have a tough day, which everyone does have tough days, going through them or going through all the cards that you have is the best way to spend. So I just want to say a massive thank you to Jake, Hannah and Naya for joining. I think that you've all done fantastic talks and answered the questions as well. So feel free to carry on watching if you like. You can stay in the studio for a bit if you want to and watch, or if you want to go off and do something else, that's fine. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we've had an absolutely phenomenal event so far, and considering everyone is a trainee teacher themselves, sharing their thoughts, which is absolutely fantastic. So now we come on to our keynote speaker, who I'll just sort of give you a clue if you didn't know who it was. You should know because it's on the advert, which is Sarah Mullin, the editor of What They Didn't Teach Me on My PGCE and Other Routes into Teaching, as well as some other books. So I'm going to add Sarah in. So good afternoon, Sarah.
Hello, thank you very much for having me, Ben.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure to actually finally meet you virtually, as it is. But yeah, so Sarah, we've had, I'm sure you've seen some really great presentations this morning on specific topics, and you're sort of going to round it up with your thoughts. So I'm going to share your slide and I'll disappear, but over to you. And if you have any questions for Sarah, please add them in, because we've had some people who weren't able to make today, we've been able to put a bit of a Q&A session in as well for Sarah. So if you've got any questions, please do add them. So yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much, Ben, for inviting me today. I'm Sarah Mullin. I'm a Deputy Head Teacher of Primary School, which is an all-through school in Edgbaston in Birmingham. I'm also studying for my doctorate in education as well, and I put together a little book that Ben was holding just earlier, and you might have heard of it. It's called What They Didn't Teach Me on My PGCE. I'm delighted to be invited here today to share with you a few little tips to help you navigate your early careers as we educate the nation's children and young people during a global pandemic. Can I just start by saying the phenomenal quality of the presentations today, and one of the things I wish I'd known during training was that we had events like this. These didn't exist when I was training to be a teacher about 16 years ago now. Absolutely fantastic. So as we start, let's begin by just taking a moment to reflect on the challenging year it's been. Never could we have imagined a time where we would be teaching bubbles and taking lateral flow tests and streaming live lessons to children who were self-isolating at home. It's been a tough academic year, especially for those of you who are new to the profession, but the summer's almost here and we've almost made it, and that's something you should be really, really proud of. You've shown resilience in the face of adversity. You've shown innovation and creativity in the ways that you've adapted your practice to respond to the ever-changing educational landscape. And by tuning into this brilliant EdConnect event today, you are showing your commitment to growing and developing as an evidence-informed practitioner. Our children and young people deserve to have teachers just like you, who are striving to provide the best possible learning experience for their children. And when times are challenging, as they've certainly been this year, it's really important to reflect on your motivations for entering the profession. Think back to when you were applying to become a teacher. Teaching is one of the most important jobs there is. It's the profession that creates all of the other professions. You will be shaping the hearts and minds of children for the rest of their lives. You will be helping them to maximize their learning potential. You will be giving children and young people the very best start in life. So please never, ever forget the impact that you will have on a child's life. It's important to periodically reflect on your why, particularly as you navigate those tricky times. Always remember that we have the most rewarding job in the whole world. We have the opportunity to make a difference every single day. As Ben was saying earlier, you really are entering what will be an exciting career with limitless opportunities. But we were all where you are now many years ago. And in fact, in some ways, we're all experiencing these unique times in education now together for the very first time. So we're all early career teachers in teaching during a pandemic. So please be assured that we really do understand and recognise both the excitement, but also the nerves and the ambitions and the worries and the concerns that you might be experiencing. And know that none of us expect you to be the finished perfect teacher right now, although by the presentations I've heard today, you are doing exceptionally well. The very best teachers are always becoming. Teachers are always learning and growing and developing as teachers so that we can have an evidence-informed understanding of what works best. So please do keep on investing in your subject knowledge. Engage with your subject associations. Participate in this brilliant EdConnect event and other events as well, so you can engage with the teachers and pick up some great tips. I always say this, but I really genuinely believe that the best resource that we have in education is one another. The wisdom and the advice and the tips that we share with one another is absolutely priceless. I'm releasing another book very soon, and it's called Chronicles from the Classroom. It's a very light-hearted book, but it's lots of student teachers and experienced teachers sharing their experiences, their top tips, their honest reflections, and there's some stories that will just have you crying with laughter as well. So hopefully you'll enjoy it and you'll pick up some top tips, and you'll realise that every single one of us has those days where absolutely nothing goes to plan. This was talked about earlier this morning again, but establishing positive relationships with your students, your parents, and your colleagues really will be central to your success as an early career teacher. Pastoral care and academic outcomes are inextricably linked. So really get to know each and every child and work closely with parents and carers so that everyone can share in the child's learning journey. Nobody knows their child better than their loved ones. And by getting to know the needs and the motivations and the aspirations of the children that we teach, we can really maximise the learning potential of every single child. There are some lovely inspirational quotes that circulate on social media, and one of my favourites is that a child doesn't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I absolutely love that one. And I think it's a message I'd really like you to take with you and hold with you as you're preparing for September. Show the children how much you care. Be the teacher that every parent would want for their child. Be the teacher that perhaps you needed when you were growing up. It's also really important to build up a positive support network so that you're surrounded by teachers in school and even on social media who will really support you every step of the way. Connect with each speaker that's been on today through EdConnect, also through Instagram, Facebook, perhaps LinkedIn and Twitter as well are also fantastic ways to connect with people. Learn from us and let us learn from you as well. It's absolutely fantastic to see the passion and the enthusiasm and the innovation of all of the teachers that have spoken today. And some of the phenomenal questions that have come up as well have really shown your thought processes and your commitment as teachers. Never ever be afraid to ask for help, advice or clarification if you need it. Trust the process. Remember that none of us got to where we are now without enduring a few bumps in the road along the way. I can assure you of that. But do reach out and find those positive, uplifting people who will celebrate your success, support you, and even challenge you to be the best that you can be. You might like to check out my YouTube channel, EdTeacher Tips, where there are some of the most inspirational educators out there who've shared their top tips and words of advice with fellow teachers. And I would love lots of you to get in touch and share your tips with other student teachers as well. You really have so much wisdom and the world needs to hear it. Now, working in education means working towards goals such as statutory examinations and end-of-unit assessments. And sometimes we're so focused on those end goals that we forget to celebrate the little wins that happen every single day in our schools. So just enjoy your early careers, enjoy them now. Yes, it's a job, and yes, it is challenging, but there's always a reason to celebrate. So try and find the positive every single day, even if some days you have to look a little bit harder than others. We know that positive, specific praise is a great way to motivate our learners, but don't forget to celebrate and see the positivity in your own achievements as well. Tweet out your success stories. It's so lovely and uplifting and positive to see other people do well. And when one succeeds, we all succeed. We could all benefit from a little bit of positivity in these worrying times. And I love to see great people doing great things. No 2 days, as you'll see, in education are ever the same. It's so important to be flexible. So you might have sat up last night planning a brilliant lesson for your class. And then you arrive into school and you might have this to-do list that you're going to do in your PPA time or after school or before school. And then suddenly the microphone on your laptop isn't working, or a child's turn up and they're really upset and they just need you to help them find their PE kit before their lesson. And suddenly it's the end of the day and you realise you haven't tackled any of this to-do list at all. And that lesson went completely out the window. Don't worry, it happens to the best of us, I promise you that. And things do get easier. As a teacher, you'll just become a master at prioritising and juggling that workload. You'll have mentors and colleagues who'll lift you up when times are tough. But don't forget to just take a minute and breathe and reflect on all the positive things that you are doing. If I could give myself some advice as an early career teacher, I would honestly go back and say that while we're always striving for excellence, of course we are, sometimes good really does have to be good enough. So let's talk about that lesson that really didn't go according to plan, or the behaviour incident that now, reflecting on it, you just wish you'd handled a little bit differently. Please do believe me when I say that each and every one of us can recall an incident that we never want to experience ever again. All mistakes are learning opportunities. So if you've had one of those days when you're feeling really deflated, please know that those feelings validate that you are in the right job because you care. Reflect on your experiences. Consider strategies that you've tried that you'll definitely use again, and think about the alternative approaches that you might wish to adopt moving forward. It's definitely worth reading a little bit more about reflective practice, as it provides the time and space to allow us to grow as professionals by exploring and learning from our experiences. Now, as teachers, as you've all shown today, giving up your Saturdays to come to this fantastic event, we give so much of ourselves to our children and to our schools. But it's really important for us to invest in our own learning as well. Take advantage of all the brilliant resources that are available online. As somebody said earlier, never forget to credit the original source of that teacher who's given up their time and their energy to share it with you. When the world's a little safer, try and attend some conferences in person where you'll have the opportunity to network with other professionals as well. And don't forget to share your ideas. Very often when I talk to people, they'll say, oh, but I didn't think it was good enough. People can adapt the resources or the ideas for their own context or their own situation. Remember, it's not always a one-size-fits-all approach in education, and what works in one school may need to be adapted for another, and the same for different classes as well. Now, probably the very best advice I can give you as an early career teacher is to put your well-being first. Teaching can be a challenging career at times, it really can. And the latest research by the Charity Education Support in conjunction with YouGov reveals that the number of teachers feeling stressed or very stressed has spiraled to worrying figures this year. So if you're feeling that way, please know that those feelings are valid, but there's some great support out there if you need it. It's hardly surprising that it's been challenging, given that we've been teaching during a global pandemic. And I think the best lesson that COVID-19 has probably taught us is that our health is really our wealth. So please be confident about making yourself a priority. This is something that never existed. The word well-being was not part of the vocabulary back in 2005 when I was doing my PGCE. I can tell you firsthand that this is incredibly hard to do, but set boundaries that you're comfortable with. As teachers, we just never stop caring, but we have to take the time to look after ourselves so that we're then best placed to help our learners and students who really do need us. And also never underestimate the power of a good night's sleep. When it's late in the evening and you've got an inbox full of emails that you need to get to, or you've maybe got exercise books to mark, really think about what do your learners need tomorrow? Do they want a teacher who's enthusiastic, full of passion and energy because they've had a great night's sleep? Or a teacher who's turned up to school who's feeling exhausted because they've been overburdened by responding to emails? If you've ever been to a conference where I've been presenting, or if you follow me on social media, you're going to hear me say these words an awful lot. Collaboration, not competition. We are all in this together. And when teachers unite, as we have done today, amazing things happen. There are so many teachers sharing their brilliant resources online. Share good practice with one another. Build your professional networks, both online and real life. Ask for help. And remember, teachers are kind of like a big family. We understand what it's like. So when you're having a bad day, I might be having a good day, we can share and unite together there as well. We really are stronger together. Thank you, Ben, once again for having me here today. And thank you to all of you who've joined in this fantastic session. I've taken a lot from it as well. COVID-19 has presented a challenging start to your early careers in education. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But look back on what you've achieved this year. It's absolutely remarkable. You've made it through one of the toughest academic years ever known. I'd like to thank you for everything you're already doing to support children and young people across the country. And I'd like to wish you the very best of luck in your future careers in education. Our children, our young people, and their adults, parents and carers are absolutely blessed to have teachers like you caring for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. As always, completely phenomenal. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you. And I think you really did bring together what all of our speakers had said and some of the golden threads that come through their talk, also the questions as well. So thank you. We have got some opportunity now for Q&A with Sarah. So there are some questions in the chat which I'll read to you, Sarah, if that's all right. And then if you've got any others, feel free to send them through the chat. So obviously a big thing is for trainees, they've not had the opportunity to say go into school and do some work experience this year because of COVID. What sort of things could they be doing instead if they can't get into a school to get some prior experience was one of the questions we was asked.
That's a really challenging question, and there's obviously no experience can replace being in a school environment. One of the things that my first ever deputy head did for us was he put us in the school minibus and he took us for a drive around the local area, and we saw some real families living in real deprivation. We saw the conditions that some families were living in, and it really hit home that some children coming to learn may not have had breakfast that morning, may not have had a bed to sleep in, may not have had a loving environment to go to. So school really is their salvation. And I think it's, sorry, a little bit off topic, but it's really important. We saw the difference that all of you are making during this pandemic, when we saw that some families had no food during the first lockdown. They had little access to healthcare. We saw that safeguarding cases had gone through the roof, and furthermore so, well-being and mental health needs had gone through the roof as well. So I would say, even though you might not have got teaching and learning experience in the classroom, please never forget the difference that you're making in society. And you can do that through just taking a drive through your local community. Look on YouTube too. There's lots of teachers sharing some great tips on there. There's some great resources on social media. And if you have a bit of time next year, maybe if you've got a little bit of a reduced timetable being an early career and you can get out to schools, definitely take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well, that just come to me. One of the things like my head teacher said, he said, because we've done all these recorded lessons now, you could go and watch all of our recorded lessons from reception to year 6 if you wanted to. So I think actually tapping into what schools have got already is a really good one. Thank you, Sarah. Another one was about obviously well-being. That's been a key thread that's came through all of the talks today. I mean, you could argue that we should have probably had a whole session on well-being, but luckily everyone's sort of covered it in some way. One of the questions we asked is, can you give some key examples of how you could practically set those boundaries with regards to your well-being?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you my example. And I remember my current head teacher in my performance management a couple of years ago gave me a well-being related target. And I was quite offended at the time. I thought, this isn't going to help me as a practitioner. But actually, it was the best advice he'd ever given. So I have 3 little children. So I will leave the school at the end of the day and pick them up, come home, do their dinner, do their homework, put them to bed. And then I get back to my laptop late into the evening. So for me, I have established a routine that works around my family and enables me to juggle being a mom with having a career as well. So I think, look at those boundaries. If you love to play football, make sure that you block off that time when you're going to be in training or playing a match, and you do that as well. Don't forget as well the power of your social circles. It's very, very tempting in term time to turn down a dinner invitation, or it might even be, a chill out time over Zoom as well. Your friends are really, really important outside of school to keep you uplifted, and you'll never forget how you feel when you're with those right people. Another thing that works for me as well is, I'll work really, really hard in term time, and I'll set a couple of days during the holidays when I'll be working. But then I'll switch off sometimes and I won't have my emails on my phone, and I'll dedicate myself to my family and to my friends. But for another teacher, it might be that they feel better when they're keeping on top of everything, and they do like to do a little bit of work every single day as well. So I would say, choose something that's right for you, and don't feel that you have to follow a particular mold or a particular pattern. But you will be a better teacher if you're looking after yourself and doing the things that you love to do. It's like when you go on holiday and you come back and you lie down on the beach and you think all your stresses just disappear, and you think, oh, this is what it feels like to not be overloaded with work.
Yeah, I think that was a really good point that you made about how every person's got their own way. Like you said, everyone's got their own circumstances. And I saw that when I think it's really important as trainee teachers, get to know what your sort of mentors and class teachers, the teachers you work with, their way. So like one of the things I remember on my second placement, my teacher said, oh, well, I tend to get in at 7:45 and I tend to go at 4:30 because I go and pick my daughter up from nursery, and then I take work home for me, and that works for me. And then my last placement, my teacher said, I actually prefer to stay here at 5 till 5, and then I go home and I don't do any work at all. And I think it's really interesting getting those tips from different people about what works for them. So I think that's a really good point. Thank you. So we've had a couple of other questions that have come through, a lot of them around wellbeing and sort of workload and teaching. But I think one of the key points you mentioned, which I think is a great point, was about networking and the importance of networking. And sometimes I think that as early career teachers, which is partly why EdConnect was set up, that we don't sort of get to networking until we're sort of a couple of years into our teaching, or maybe if we want to become a leader, then we start to network. So what sort of tips would you give as to, especially if you're a nervous sort of person, as to how you then go about sort of developing and curating that network?
Well, I would say, obviously in school, you're going to have your mentor and you're going to have your department, and you might even make some lovely friends in school as well. But sometimes there'll be a question or something you want to talk about that you might not feel comfortable talking about where you work. So I would say do connect with the people on Twitter. And Twitter becomes almost like your virtual family. And then some of those people on Twitter will end up becoming real life friends. You'll see each other and you'll see each other at events or in conferences like this, and you'll recognise the names. That's a really good way as well. There's on a Wednesday, there's a follow back thread that happens where teachers are invited to connect with one another. And that's a great way to get to know lots of other people as well. Events as well, hopefully they'll start back up quite soon. And I know there's a few being planned for next year. Please don't be shy. I mean, we're all very similar. We all know what it's like as teachers. It's not like other industries where it's quite cutthroat and everyone's heading to the top. In teachers, we are motivated by making a difference to the children. So if we see somebody that's coming along feeling a bit nervous, we'll look after you and invite you to come and sit with us and things. And we've had it on Twitter as well, where people have said, is anyone going to this event at the weekend? I'm going on my own. And there's a thread of people underneath that will say, I'll be on your train and I'll sit in here. So, you know, it's a great way to meet other people.
Yeah, I think that's like really good points there, especially about the in-person, because I think one of the things you said about the collaboration, not competition, and I think it was Emma Turner who on one event said, you know, teachers love working with other teachers, whether that be in school, online, other schools. And I remember I emailed my placement head teacher this week about something for my school. I was like, I'm really sorry to ask, and she was like, never be sorry to ask, because, you know, we've all got different things to give and we've all got different things to offer. So so we've got a chance for, I think we'll do one more question and then we'll sort of wrap up the event. So thank you everyone for all your questions that you're coming in with. I didn't know whether you wanted to talk actually rather than answer a question. Obviously, like I said, I've got your book here to sort of plug to everyone. If you haven't got this, get it, because it's such a great book that I think it's the kind of book that you could read to cover if you want, but the best way I've sort of done it is by dipping in and out. Like, especially it tends to be, I should probably just take it to school with me, because I tend to come home, run upstairs, get it out, and then look at a specific one. So do you want to just explain a little bit about how it's sort of structured in a way to anyone that hasn't read it yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the book, I invited experienced and newer teachers to write down exactly what this event has been today. What are the things that you wish you'd known many years ago? Now, many of them you couldn't have known because issues like safeguarding and wellbeing are quite new to education, really. Even though they've always existed, they didn't really have the focus or the priority that they did. So I invited in the collections, and then I noticed there's a common threads throughout. So they're broadly collated into themes, and you'll have things like your top tips. You'll have what's worked for teachers in their settings. You'll have some hilarious stories that really will have you chuckling about things that have happened to teachers. Then you've got really honest reflections as well, things that went wrong and how people navigated those situations through to victory as well. Now, I hope you don't mind me mentioning Ben, but I've got a little opportunity for all of your teachers if they would like it today. So I've got another book I'm editing over the summer, and it's about our experiences during a global pandemic. We know that the media aren't particularly positive about teachers, especially during lockdown. We know we were not on holiday. We worked harder than ever. So what I want to do is I want to put together a book that's going to go down in history that tells readers just what it was like to be teaching during a pandemic. You can chart your wave of emotions throughout. You can talk about something that worked for you. You could talk about balancing your own personal and professional issues. You could talk about how you struggle to manage your well-being, perhaps, when you were putting the children's needs in front of your own. If you would like to write, check me out on Twitter, and it's got all the link there as well. Roughly 500 words, but it can be a little bit less if you want to. And make sure that you've had your voice heard and that you go down in history for really educating the nation's children and young people during challenging times.
Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity, everyone. So we'll make sure we share that on our Twitter as well, because I think it's going to be a memento that when we are all mentors of teachers in 10 years, 20 years time, however long, that's something to say, a few stories to tell about this time period. So thank you. So thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure to have you and to sort of sum up all of the amazing things that have gone on this morning. So thank you so much again for giving up a bit of your Saturday to join us, and hopefully meet you in person at some point as well.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Ben, and well done for this brilliant event.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Okay, well, it's been absolutely phenomenal today. So I'm just going to share the screen again because we've had quite a few people talk today. Unfortunately, not everyone could be here. So I wanted to share, obviously, everyone on the screen again who couldn't be with us today. But some people are going to provide us with their slides that they intended to use or any other information. That will all be added to our member area of the EdConnect website. So if you're not a member, I'm going to now put into the chat, which I did add earlier, which hopefully it does work, the link to sign up. If not, you can go to our website or you can go to the social media links, and they provide all that information on there as well. So just going to go through some next steps sort of after today's event. So if you're not a member already, you might want to sign up as a member to get access to the recording, because we add it to the member area of our website. So please do, and also further events and details will be sent to you. You should have had already, and I know some people had issues with getting the link this morning. We think that's because some of the emails might have gone to your junk from Eventbrite. So we do apologise for that, but please do check out, because you will have had another email from Eventbrite, which will have details on about the survey that we ask. Obviously, we're not event pros, we are teachers who are trying to help others. So if you've got any feedback about the event, please do. That's your opportunity to put it in there, and also any questions that you have about the event as well, or following on from the event. Share your thoughts using the hashtag EdConnect, and I'm going to bring Kat in a moment, and hopefully Lima will join us, who have been our social media whizzes and have been very, very busy with all the different messages we've received and have given up some of their Saturday to help us. So thank you to both of them, and I will be adding them onto the screen in a moment. So please do add any thoughts that you have onto the chat, onto the social media, and we'll happily tag and tweet. If you have any questions, you want to get in contact with any of our speakers, please do DM us. As a final two things, and I'm going to add to the chat, our next event, which is our final event of the academic year, is preparing for your early career. And it's a panel discussion, and I'm hoping this link will work, because it's come up very strange for me for some reason. So I'm going to paste it in, and hopefully it works. And this is our next event, which is in July, and it's all about your early career. So please do sign up, and there'll be other events next year. We're currently thinking about what events we are going to run next year. And one of them, we've got the provisional date for our launch event, which will have a wellbeing focus. It'll be a virtual event on Saturday, the 9th of October. It is a provisional date, and we'll try and share a bit more information at the end of our next event. But I'm now going to stop sharing and add Kat in. Unfortunately, Lima hasn't joined us just yet, so hopefully she'll join us in a bit, or she might have technical issues. And I just wanted to bring Kat on to say a big thank you, because Kat, as well as attending this event and watching as she starts her teacher training in September, she's also one of our network leaders for EdConnect in England, one of our England leaders, has been managing the social media with regards to Twitter. So Kat, first of all, thank you. And what would you say is your main takeaway from this event?
Oh, there have been so many takeaways. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm in my earpods and they're not working very well today. Brilliant. I mean, I've been sharing some of the biggest takeaways on Twitter, and I think certainly Paul and his ideas of making sure that you're obviously making the best use of the collaborations that you've got with the staff, and making sure you've got those boundaries. And obviously, Sarah, the last ones, I mean, I put some quotes up on Twitter about your feelings are valid and never underestimate the power of a good night's sleep. There's just been so much. I think I'd be here for about half an hour if I then treated out every single quote and thing that I wrote down. But I think it's been invaluable. I think for all of us trainee teachers, anyone considering going into teaching today, there's just been so much help. It's been fantastic.
Yeah. And I think it's just remembering, like Sarah said about that you do matter. It's all about thinking that I think some people, we say, you know, oh, I'm just a trainee. You're not just anything. You are a teacher. You're already a teacher, trainee or not. So I'm glad that loads of people have found it useful. Please do take the time to fill out the survey. And I'll pop, just for ease, the survey link into the the YouTube chat, sorry. So I'll add that in so you can directly click on it. But yeah, thank you everyone for giving up some of your Saturday. I hope as it is here, the sun is starting to come out, so you'll be able to enjoy some of the sun and any of the football that's on, if anyone is watching the football. But thank you very much everyone, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.